Well, what I was going to say here is I think that once you can understand that tribalism is not a negative thing, but it's part of the human experience, it can help you understand yourself better. So what do I mean by that? One of the exercises that I do with my clients is I ask them, like, I'm just, when you talk to people, as an example, about Google, maybe like there's an assumption that everybody knows who Google is, but does
Mm,
everybody know who YouTube is and what you specifically worked on at YouTube? I think it's important then if you like layer in, okay, if we know that there's some tribalism, maybe there's some bias.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets, the podcast where we talk with successful career coaches on how they built their success and the hard lessons they learned along the way. My name is Davis Nguyen, and I'm the founder of Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, and even $100,000 weeks. Before Purple Circle, I've grown several 7- and 8-figure career coaching businesses myself, and have been a consultant at 2 career coaching businesses that are doing over $100 million each. Whether you're an established coach or building your practice for the first time, you'll discover the secrets to elevating your coaching business.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets Podcast. I'm Pedro, and today's guest is Derek Ling, a high-performance career strategist who helps senior leaders and executives get unstuck in today's competitive job market. With more than 20 years in global talent leadership, he works with high achievers navigating layoffs, career ceilings, or stalled searches to sharpen how they communicate their value and land roles that truly fit. Through his white glove coaching program, he blends career strategy, brand storytelling, sales training, and negotiation support to help clients rebuild confidence, clarify their direction, and secure aligned offers, often with significant compensation growth. His focus goes beyond landing the job to developing leaders who thrive long after they step into the role. Welcome to the show, Derek.
Pedro, thank you for that introduction. That was very, very nice of you. Thanks so much. I'm really excited about this conversation.
I'm excited that you're here. And before we get into what you do now, Derek, I'm curious how this all actually started, right? So what was going on in your life when coaching became more than just an idea?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you gave us gave me some prompts to think about this. And so one of the things that I do with my clients that I think is helpful for other people to understand about themselves is their own origin story. And so come into coaching different ways. I started managing people when I was 20. I worked in hospitality from the ages of like 20 to 28. And so I was solving this problem, which a lot of us do, which is how do you build a team or a company through the people function? And so from 20 to 28, I did 3 restaurant startups. I hired something like probably like 1,000 people in the restaurant business. And then, so I started studying management at a pretty early age. And one of the things that happened to me at that time, I was like a great waiter. And as a waiter, you're in sales. And so the management team that I had an opportunity to lead. And that was the first time where I went from an IC, an individual contributor, to managing. And I think I went through something that a lot of people go through, which is being in like complete no man's land. So like you go from an individual contributor to a manager without any kind of management training. I think that's very common for most people. You see it in the engineering world. So maybe someone who's a great communicator, someone that gets along with product leaders or sales or marketing. And so they put an engineer into a leadership role. But it's very common for that person to not have any real training. But that was my experience when I was 20. Learned through a lot of failure, but then also learned through a lot of other people's failures. Started to read about what do great managers do. And so I started following people like Warren Buffett later on in my life. And so I took that experience of developing teams in the restaurant business, and then I went into tech and joined a company called Yahoo. Are you familiar with Yahoo by chance?
Yeah, I am.
Yahoo, when I was working there, they had 5 CEOs in the 5 years, 5 different CEOs in the 5 preceding years before I joined. And when I joined, there was someone called Marissa Mayer, who at that time period was very famous because she was employee number 20 at Google. She moved to Yahoo as their CEO. And the goal was to bring this iconic brand back to greatness, which is a very hard thing to do, by the way, and a lot of companies or most companies fail at this. But the thing for your listeners, I think that's important, that story, is we hired 7,000 people in the 3 years that I was there. When we talked about coaching, a lot of the coaching work that I did at that time was help reimagine what our hiring process looked like. And so if you're trying to hire at that kind of scale, at that time we only had, I think it was 8 mobile engineers, and we scaled from 8 to 1,000 in 1 year. And so when we talk about like transformation or corporate transformations, a lot of what leaders need to do is to help people understand the why of what we're doing. Why are we going to mobile? Why are we hiring mobile engineers? What does the archetype of a mobile engineer look like? And how do we go out and compete with the Metas, the Googles, the Amazons of the world for talent? And so I spent two years here in the Valley, and then I actually moved to Singapore and ran talent acquisition operations for Yahoo in Southeast Asia and India. And so I thought it was really important at that time. Having global experience was something that was, I think, really sought after. I'm not sure if it's still looked at the same way given the current kind of geopolitical environment that we have. But at that time, I was interested because we were hiring and working with global teams, but I didn't quite know what it meant to be in an HR leadership role in another world. And it meant something very different. One of the things that I found working in that part of the world is we do things in Silicon Valley and how another part of the world, the skill set they have for something like hiring, how they prioritize who they hire, what countries they hire in, the strategy around approaching something like sourcing talent was something that wasn't as advanced as where we are today. And so that was another kind of like arrow in my quiver in developing what we're calling coaching. So I took that experience of scaling at Yahoo and then went into biotech and worked in the genetics field. And long story short is I took these like systems and processes that we developed at Yahoo, and I went to a company called Helix that at that time was a competitor of 23andMe. And their goal was to develop the ability for you to understand yourself through your DNA. And so they would provide you with a saliva sample, and we had a lab in San Diego. That lab would process your DNA, it would be uploaded in the cloud, and then you could query your genetic data. That was the idea. The thing that's, I think, interesting maybe for your clients is, or for your listeners, is when you work at a large company like a Google or Amazon or Yahoo, you're much more of a system implementer, I would describe it. You're not a system designer. And so I took a first of its kind role. I was the head of talent. I was the first HR hire. I helped us scale from 28 people to roughly 200 in 2 years. And so when we talk about systems that we build or coaching CEOs to understand the types of executives that we need to hire for in a brand new industry, that's where a lot of my coaching chops were developed.
Right.
And so I took that experience, went to maybe like, let's call it 15 other startups over the course of the next 10 years to help them build out fluency or like advanced capabilities in these areas that we're talking about: talent development, sourcing, creating process, comp design. Became the expert negotiator for almost every company that I worked with. And so, well, how did I then arrive where I am today? So I found that there's kind of like two fundamental challenges that companies have and people have. So on the corporate side, no matter what company you're at today across the S&P 500 or at a startup, there's very little structure that exists or understanding of what it means to be great at your job. And that's at every level. It doesn't matter if you're a C-level executive or if you're a VP or a director or a senior manager. And that evaluation system isn't actually being cascaded very well to the interview teams themselves. So there's not like a common vernacular or knowledge base of what it means to be great as a coach, as an example, or as in the new world, right? If I'm going to build, how do I approach doing that? Who am I going to find that can help bring the vision today where we can integrate AI capabilities? And these subjects today are not being taught or communicated very well, in my opinion. And I'm seeing this on the company side when it then becomes to what we call either talent selection or talent filtering. So what do I mean by that? So if you see, let's say, a job opening for a director of product management, and there's 1,000 people that apply to that job, I would say that most of those teams have not gone together to really define the candidate archetype of what it means to be great for this job. How do we defining success? What are the character traits that we're looking for? What company should this person have worked at? What are the skills that we're looking for? And so that's one problem that we're having on the company side. On the individual, on the job seeker side, they actually have the same problem. But that problem is, who am I? What makes Pedro different than the 1,000 other candidates that are out?
Mm.
And how do I develop an authentic brand or authentic message about who I am in a world where people are pretty scared to be themselves? And so I've been focused on these two problems. One on the company side, which is, hey, how do we hire at scale? How do we find people who fit our culture and can help us achieve this vision that we need to create? And on the individual side, I think that there's where I've been focused the last 3 years, which is if I've been at Google for 10 years and now I have to reimagine who I am. I don't know who I am. I don't know, are my values still the Google values? How do I describe to somebody that doesn't know Google and the ad tech platform that I helped build or that I sold? How do I explain that to somebody in a conversation just like we're having now so people can understand the value that I can bring? And
Yeah.
so I've I've negotiated something like 3,100 offers at this point over my career. I've negotiated against almost every company in the S&P 500, both either for on the employer side or the candidate side. And I've looked at something like, I don't know, a million resumes, and I'm not exaggerating, something like a million resumes in LinkedIn profiles. And I understand the challenges that people have in describing who they are, because it's very apparent when you look at someone's LinkedIn profile and it's blank. And what I think everybody thinks is that's a branding problem. And the reality, in my opinion, is it's a psychology problem. And the
Mm.
psychology problem is being able to distill who am I in a world where people are pretty scared to tell the world who they are. And one of the things that you had said is, what should coaches do differently if they're starting a business? And it's really being able to define how they're different than other coaches that are out there. I would say that's the same thing for someone that's a director of product at maybe like Amazon or Google or Netflix. And so but they don't use third person storytelling or what I would say is like corporate jargon.
Mhm.
But people often describe themselves in ways that it's an undecipherable how they're different than others. It's like almost like mimicking. It's like, oh, okay, I
Right.
see how Pedro's marketing himself on LinkedIn. Let me copy it. I'm going to just copy that
Mm.
style.
Okay. You took me to a journey here, man. I'm thinking. Okay. So first of all, I like the fact that you mentioned the waiter is in sales. I think that's hilarious. I think that's so true. Also, I would say I would highlight also what you brought up about being great at technical skills, but not as great when we're talking about management skills. You know, that shift when you have someone that you brought up, like, hey, he's a great technician. Is he a good leader? Is he a good manager? So, definitely something to highlight. I would say also, and I think this topic is so interesting because I was reading about it, when you mention the Google example and the corporate, how to an extent, it sounds like people they suppress their true selves when they're in corporate. It's like they're trying to adjust, right? And you know who else does that? And usually ties to different. I wouldn't call it's almost like a different identity, which is tribal in a certain way. Are teenagers, right? So we do that when we're teenagers. We're like, oh, I'm with the punk kids. I'm with the football guys, or I'm a wax, and then we grow up, we graduate, and we do all over again, but in corporate, right? We try to adapt, we try to adjust. So we don't want to be picked up on. We don't want to, look bad. We want to do the playbook that someone else wrote. It sounds like this is just me thinking out loud. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you agree with that, and but
Well,
that's
I
something so
completely,
very, very interesting.
yeah, it's part of our it's part of our human cognition system. So we are hardwired for tribalism.
Mhm.
And so I think that that's an important thing as part of my coaching practice is to help people understand actually how our brains work.
I guess that the tribalism is so, I mean, it's so powerful and it's so present, and especially when we're trying to adjust. That's definitely true. Now, I want to
Yeah.
understand, please go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say here is I think that once you can understand that tribalism is not a negative thing, but it's part of the human experience, it can help you understand yourself better. So what do I mean by that? One of the exercises that I do with my clients is I ask them, like, I'm just, when you talk to people, as an example, about Google, And maybe like there's an assumption that everybody knows who Google is, but does everybody know who YouTube is and what you specifically worked on at YouTube? And I think it's important then if you like layer in, okay, if we know that there's some tribalism, maybe there's some bias around how people may interpret your profile, you should engage on that. You should actually engage on that. And so, well, what do I mean by that? So if you're in an interview setting, or even if you're like in a networking call, if you're on a backyard barbecue and you tell someone, oh, I work at YouTube or I work at Google. And then actually like one of the first things that you should do is not explain the specifics of what you do, but you should ask for familiarity. Like, I'm just curious, Pedro, how much do you know about YouTube? Are you a user? What's your favorite YouTube channel? And so you can gauge bias based on asking questions. And one of the challenges that I observe through the work that I do is that most people are so uncomfortable with their story because they haven't written it down, or maybe they're like working with an LLM, their favorite LLM, to refine their story, but they haven't really thought about the nuance of the story. Right? And so one of the things that I teach as an example is the STAR framework. Have you heard of the STAR framework before?
No, please enlighten me.
Okay. The STAR framework is to storytelling as arithmetic is to mathematics. So if you don't know the STAR framework, in my opinion, it's kind of like a handicap. So why do I say that? So most people, if you look at, we'll talk about like what's relevant to your listeners. Most people start with results on their resume. They'll say, oh, I worked at Google. I was a product manager, or I am a product manager, and I worked on search, right? And then they'll have a bunch of results, 100 million daily active users, improved engagement time from 1 hour to 3 hours, kind of making stuff up. But they don't tell the context of the story. Part of the search business did you work on? Why were you hired? What problems did you solve? And actually, the thing is that people don't think deeply enough about the story. So they just tell the results. So let me back up because I haven't explained what the STAR framework is. It stands for situation. And so it describes like, hey, before I talk about working on the search business, who is Google? Google has 200,000 employees, maybe more. And so who are they? Who is Google? What time period were you hired? Like if you're getting hired now and you're working on Gemini, that's probably incredible. But if you were working on some moonshot project at Google that no one's ever heard of, and you don't describe that moonshot project in a lot of detail, and you worked there in 2016 and now it's 10 years later and nobody understands the relevance, you're going to have a very tough time conveying the value that you can bring to the table. So that's like the situation. What is Google? Maybe it's the project that you worked on. There's the task. I think about task as, well, how was I hired? What problems did I help solve? How did I lead through those? There's the action part, which is, well, maybe like, what did I actually do? What did my team do? Like, what were the different initiatives that we worked on? And then there's the results themselves. And the results are always more than just, a handful of metrics. A lot of cases, as an example, especially at the leadership level, what we're navigating is really tough political environments where there's some antagonist in the story. Maybe it was the sales leader that was really tough to win over, or it was the leader that didn't understand why what you were working on or the position that you had was important, but you were able to overcome that. And so most people, because they don't know the STAR framework well enough, and they're not putting their life stories in this format, and they're generally speaking, if you only interview once every 10 years, people aren't great at selling themselves. So like selling is a skill. And we've gone through this time period where there used to be 4 jobs for every one person. You didn't actually have to try very hard to get a job. Now, with the economy where it is, with AI and how it's transforming all of our jobs, the competitive, so there's now less than 1 job for all of the job seekers. It's like 1-to-1. It used to be 4-to-1. Now it's 1-to-1. And so we're in the most competitive job market we've ever been, and people are using skill set that was never built for this time period.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now,
did I do a good job of explaining the STAR framework?
You did the STAR framework. Yeah, you did. Yes, and I see where you're coming from. Now, what I want to know is once you were out there helping people, right? Who did you naturally end up attracting in your coaching business? Like, when did you realize, yeah, these are the people that I work best with?
I'm still finding that out. But I think like a lot of people, so, I'll give you kind of like the origin story of this business. 3 years ago, I was running HR talent for a startup. Startup acquired a bank in the middle of Kansas City. And I found out that I'm probably not equipped or like I'm used to working in very high tech, high innovation businesses. This is a fintech company that acquired a bank in Kansas City that had a culture that I wasn't really going to be a fit for. And so I decided that I wasn't sure that that was the kind of work that I enjoyed anymore. I didn't really enjoy doing like working through insurance policies or like thinking about payroll and benefits. I'm not sure if you can tell. I like really enjoy like the sales side. I'm very creative in my work. I love helping people. And I was trying to build this like high performance approach to developing helping people achieve. So I would describe it. I just wasn't finding a fit in corporate America. And so I went through this kind of existential crisis, and my wife and I had a conversation. I was going through some depression, and she's like, listen, if you're going to be this depressed, and we had just bought a house. And so we had this mortgage over our heads. And I was like, okay, I've got to do something radically different. And so what did I do? I actually spent 3 months and did nothing related to work. Learned how to garden outside. I'm a big believer in like nature cleansing and like learning about life through other organisms. And so I took up this gardening habit or gardening. And through that, because I've recruited so many people over the lifetime of career, people started coming to me and asking for help that were being laid off. And these were my friends. So there's kind of like two main areas where I spend my career. One is in ad tech, like Yahoos of the world. I've worked with a lot of people from like every major tech company, consumer tech company you can think of. And then in the healthcare, med tech, genetic space, all my clientele, generally speaking, comes through those two mediums. And so I had clients that were being laid off, and I would just help them for free. I just did the work pro bono. I was like, I don't know if this is a career. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but let me just help my friends. And so I would like look at their resume, and I would say, first thing, always like, hey, send me your resume. Let me take a look at it. And I would look at it and I would say, hey, this is like a 20-year-old resume format. I don't know if you're aware, but this is like really boring for me to read. And it actually doesn't represent you very well. And so I started to develop this, discovery work to help people rethink how they're describing their story. And that's both in their written story and their oral story. And through this process, the first person I worked with who got laid off, I helped them get a job at a competitor of their last company and increase their offer. Like the equity offer was a 5x increase from where they started. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe there's something here. And so that's when the idea first started. I think the word of mouth through my referral network people started to understand and get to know the kind of work that I was doing and how I was achieving these outcomes and so I think for people who are your listeners, for other coaches, there may be an idea. I was thinking about doing this business 8 years ago, and I was so scared to do this because what I do is I work for my clients in a way that I always wanted to work for people internally. But when you work in corporate HR, unfortunately, you're beholden. I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, but you're really there to protect the company and their best interests. And so even if you are the most compassionate person and you got into HR because you love people and you want to help them in your career, you're never there as an example of them to maximize their income. You're there to give them the lowest offer. Right. And so I took those insights and I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. Like, I think that I know how the irrationality and how comp decisions are made. And so let me help my clients use my thinking about like how I understand, XYZ business. They don't have an HR leader. I know that there are massive problems in how they construct offer. I can help my clients navigate that in a way that I think very few other people can. And so if you have, and for your coaching clients that are out there are things that people know. It's a very common, what I call negative bias. What is the negative bias? There are skills and domains that people know extremely well that they have been developing over a lifetime that they do not give themselves credit for because it comes so easy to them.
Mm.
And that is the thing that people need to write down and say, okay, like what is the problem that I can solve that I'm in at the top of my field? And is there a business idea there? And had I started this business 8 years ago, I mean, I would have had the courage. I think I would have been a little bit further than I am now, but it probably wouldn't have had some of the misfires that I had in my career where the negative self-talk that kind of consumed me. I wasn't able to break through it until about 3 years ago, but I wish I had earlier on in my career and not listened. So where I'm going with this, oftentimes we like go to people who are in our industry, who are leaders in our industry, and they've taken a career path and they'll give you advice that they've taken or other people have given them. But we're often not stepping outside of our comfort zone and saying, okay, how are other people breaking through and how do they approach doing that? How can I use some of those principles to help me break through in what I'm doing? And I think that I was guilty of that pre 3 years ago until I got so fed up working for other people that I was like, oh, okay, my passion, like my motivation is to never have to work for somebody again. And
Mm.
that's what keeps me going every day. Because I know that if I can have control of my life and the control of how I think, how I manage my day, that I'm going to be in the best mental place. It's going to impact every other aspect, like spiritual health, my mental health, friendships, my community. And I think that that's oftentimes one of the biggest challenges that we all have is we're letting our negative self-talk of doing the thing that we really should be doing.
Okay, that's interesting. I love the fact that you brought up like the HR is to serve the business, which I understand from I've been an employer and an employee, and I can understand where you're coming from because at the end of the day, sometimes employees they're looking at a person, right? They're right in front of you, and there's this trust factor, and they think they're having like an open-ended conversation, a true conversation, but at the end of the day they need to realize it's just a job and you're here to, serve the business, which I know it's kind of heartbreaking in a sense because sometimes people they arrive so vulnerable, right? But it's just part of the game. I know if you don't go with it, someone else will. And like you said, there's external factors, right? There's mortgage, there's bills to pay, and you didn't got inside a system to challenge it, right? You're inside a system to go through it and follow the playbook. So I understand where you're coming from with that. Now, I want to talk about more of your business right now. Okay. I want to
Sure.
talk about the mechanics behind the scenes for a moment. Like when someone decides to work with you, Derek, what does that actually look like from their perspective?
Yeah, I would say that there's different types of people that come to work for me or work with me. So maybe I can like break these up into the customer segment. So there's one type of person that's going to come to me who has an offer and they're looking for help to navigate how to improve the compensation terms. So like the cash compensation, the bonus, the equity terms, the terms of the contract itself, benefits, et cetera. And so that's one type of engagement that I have. And for clients that I work with at that level, it's a shorter engagement. Typically, people should expect if you're at like a director level plus, that once you get a verbal offer, that's the first time you actually get to start asking questions. So you move from a seller to a buyer. And so that's a great time to come and engage with me so we can start to understand how the company has decided to make this offer itself, which is oftentimes not communicated at all up until this point. So because of my background and understanding how all of these companies design their compensation strategies, my superpower is to essentially use that against the company. So because these decisions are highly illogical, and I'm a logician to some extent, where I can help my client navigate the logic or lack of logic in how the offer was made to look for opportunities for us to upgrade the offer. So that's one scenario. The second scenario, or the second kind of client that I work with, is someone who's not just focused on compensation necessarily, but is thinking about their overall, maybe like life and career goals. And so one of the biggest challenges that I think people face today is, and traditionally where like this is the world that I've come from, people that work for companies have set career goals and maybe even life goals depending on the company that they work for. So it's been traditional that if you work for Coca-Cola or Google or any one of these companies, There's organizational goals, and then there's department level goals, and then there's maybe even goals within your sub-department, and then you as the individual have goals.
Mm-hmm.
That is a pretty broken system at this point from what I'm not sure that's ever been done that well, but for most of the clients that I work with, they don't have goals. Well, why is that important? Because if you're in a job search, it's really important to understand what you're optimizing for and why before you even start your search. And that's actually something that I find often when people tell me they've worked with other career coaches is that those career coaches had never asked them about their goals. And so my goal as a coach is to help align behavior with vision. And so if you don't have goals, your behavior is not going to align to anything. And so, well, like what's an example? So like, let's demystify what goals are. So a very common thing that I'll ask, Pedro, I'm curious for you. Do you have a goal setting methodology that you subscribe to?
I do, but I want to hear from yours. Maybe I can add one more to my belt.
Sure. So companies traditionally, a lot of them subscribe to a goal setting methodology called OKRs. Have you heard of OKRs? Maybe 80% of people have heard of them. And so what OKRs stand for is objectives and key results. And so what I've done is I've said, hey, okay, if your company uses objectives and key results, why not use that for yourself? And what if you were to use that for every quadrant of your life? And so there's another framework that I kind of combine, which is Gallup's framework for well-being. But I think in order to have a fulfilled life, this is again Gallup's research, that you're investing in your mental, spiritual, physical health, your friendships, your community, your work, and your finances, and your hobbies. And so if you invest in all these different areas, the outcome, which is what I hope is like the joy that we have in life, there's a higher probability that you're going to succeed in having a more joyful life. I think that's important when we think about what I would call life design. And so that's the first thing that I ask my clients or even a potential client, which is, hey, I'm curious, what are your goals right now and how can I help you achieve them? And as we get older in our life, I'm 43, but got a daughter and who's 2.5, and I've got a son due in 6 weeks. As we all get older in life, I think that the way that we measure success likely should change. And not everybody has that, what I would call that operating system to think about, okay, like, am I thinking about my life in these different quadrants? What would success look like? And what is maybe a goal setting methodology I could use to say that I've succeeded if I talk to you February 25th, 2027? I think what OKRs are great. I'm a big fan of a writer's named Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he has a quote. He said, nothing great was ever done without inspiration. He has another quote, which is, once you make a decision, the world conspires to make it happen. And so if you can, in your goal setting methodology, say, okay, like, hey, one of the things that I want to do in my life related to work, as an example, AI is the big thing right now. So maybe you're saying like, hey, I think it's only maybe 15% of people, 15% of people are actually using AI daily in their life and are using different models that are out there. And so maybe your goal for this year is to say, hey, I'd like to buy ChatGPT and Notebook LM. And my goal is just to develop competency using these three and to be able to evaluate them. So if I were to ask how I'm doing my job differently, I can tell people like, hey, I'm using Claude right now. And I used to have this job in HR and I used to think I needed to amass this massive team. But now because of Claude and my ability to do X, Y, Z, let's say it's like comp strategy. Okay. I need to hire 100 people. Now I can use Claude and put in my headcount plan into it. And it can help me develop a categorization and a prioritization system that my team can understand better than what I used to be able to do. And that's maybe just a skill that you'd like to develop, or maybe it's your health. And so maybe it's one has a health goal and they say, hey, I'd like to improve my spiritual health. Okay. Maybe I would ask a question like, do you have a spiritual practice? And if you do, then say like, okay, well, what would a good outcome in your spiritual practice be? Is it, I have a client of mine that said, he wants to read the Bible. So just putting on your calendar, okay, well, what you can put like that, maybe hours, like, I want to read the Bible an hour every 3 days a week. Okay, great. But what is the actual outcome that you would want to get because of that? What are you hoping to achieve by reading the Bible? Yeah, this is one of the things that I just did a workshop with a client yesterday where he was showing me his goals. And one of the big challenges with OKRs is if you don't make them measurable, you're not going to know whether or not you succeeded, and your people that you're leading or you're working with are not going to know what success looks like.
Mm.
And so this can be applied both either on an individual level or on a professional level. But going back to this insight that I've seen is most companies are not deploying these at a level that I think are meaningful enough that's going to, one, be measurable, but maybe even more importantly, it's to be inspired by the goal. It's like the big question for you or I is like, what does a better version of Derek or Pedro look like? Maybe that's going to be the inspiration that's going to get us to behave differently.
Yeah, man. So someone arrives and they're like, I want Derek's help, right? And they're in the second moment, they're like questioning reality. I like that. It's like question the true meaning behind what is your intention and what do you really want. And I love that because that's true coaching at the end of the day, for me at least. And Derek, before we close this out, if someone resonated with what you shared and wants to follow your work, where should they go?
You can reach out to me at dereklingconsulting.com, and you can find a way to just email me, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well. The one thing that I think is important, I just want to kind of like leave it off with this, which is like, why is it so important to have a vision around what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because what you want to communicate to the world is the future looking version of who you are. People are not necessarily going to hire you for what you've done in the past. They are going to hire you based on what you're motivated to do in the future. And so as an example, like one of the things that people are automating is the outreach process itself. They go to some company, they use AI to rebrand who they are. And then that AI thing sends your resume out to, I've seen one company, 2,000 companies. Like, okay, but when you really think about what you're trying to achieve, can you really help 2,000 companies? Is it really aligned with what I would call your intrinsic motivation? And so what my service is the opposite of the automated service. It's asking the hard questions so people can have a better outcome, like a intentional life in a world where we are living extremely reactively. And so that would be like the kind of person that I think is going to do well in this service. That's like, hey, we can create a roadmap for what your goals are and then actually implement it into the world. So you're not confused when you're in an interview and you're like, oh, okay, how did I end up here? There should be no confusion. That should be intentional.
That's true because it defeats the purpose if there's no intention and if it's not aligned, at least in my perspective. There were a few things you shared today on this conversation that really stood out to me. I would say first is what it means to be great at your job, right? That quote, what good looks like for this specific role. I think that's very important and reminds us that sometimes that when we're applying to a job, we're like, oh, they have this perfect scenario, this perfect idea of who they're hiring. But in reality, more often than not, it's really not like that, which I think it's a good reminder, and also for the applicants, like you said, you need to know why are you applying for X, Y, and Z job or what are you trying to achieve. So that's a great reminder. I would say the friends that reached out to you and the pro bono work and you start butchering their resume, like, right? I mean, in a good way, trying to help, but I really like that. So organic, so natural. So like, hey, Derek is good at this. Why not? Right? Why not? Should I ask for his help? And you were there and you were able to help them. And that gave you courage to move forward in your own business. So it's a two-way street at the end of the day, your friends reaching out and you helping them. I really like that. It's that simple. The reminder about how people don't know how to sell themselves, especially in an interview process, in a hiring process, and you've been in over 1 million applicants, 7,000 people that you hired. I'm not even gonna sum up all of the people you impacted doing the HR experience, but it shows that you really, really understand the process. I think this puts you in a different stage, to be candid. I love the fact that also, as much as we're talking corporate, the coach is also present. When I asked you about the niche, you're like, I'm still finding that out. When you told me you faced depression, that you were scared, to move forward with your own business with this experience that you told me, hey, 8 years ago, it might have opened it, but no, it was 3 years ago. So What I'm trying to say is keyword vulnerability. I think coaching is all about vulnerability. And the reason I say this is because sometimes we, and when I say we, I'm also career coaches, we ask so much from clients, asking hard questions and demanding so much. At the end of the day, it's only fair we do the same. We're vulnerable like you are, and you own it. You're not scaring away, you're not shying away from experience that made who you are today. So I commend you on that, really commend you on that. And
There's something there that I think is really important for people to think about, which is if you want to get a different outcome than where you are, you have to analyze how did you become to where you are, and then think about what am I going to do differently to get a different outcome. Ray Dalio talks a lot about this. Are you familiar with Ray Dalio?
Mm-hmm.
Ray Dalio. So I got a coaching certification through his personality assessment program. It's called Principles U. And his perspective, so he is a big believer in personality assessments. He believes that developing self-awareness is the most important thing in life. And so in order to develop self-awareness, you have to be vulnerable. And then you have to be able to push through in this world now of the growth mindset and ask yourself, what am I willing to do or sacrifice in order to get what I want? And Ray Dalio's quote that I think is so powerful, which it's not one that everybody subscribes to, which is pain plus reflection equals progress. And it is that friction that I've gone through in my whole life, which I can also help simplify for other people. Like the thing that I hope is that I can help people not make the same mistakes that I made in my own life. And so one of the big things that I would say for anybody, by the way, it's like, okay, if you analyze the companies that I've worked at, I worked at 15 startups. None of them had exits. One of them has had an exit that was positive. And so I had to reevaluate my whole investment thesis. And I no longer work with full time for startups because they're highly risky. I have a different risk tolerance than I did before. And so for other people that are out there that are considering working with a coach, or for coaches who are qualifying their clients, this is a big one, which is not just what are your goals? It's what are you willing to do to achieve those goals? Because as coaches, one of the things that we often are going to do is we're going to ask somebody to try something different than what they've done before. And I can't tell you the number of times I've given somebody the exact playbook on what to do, and it is their ego that stops them from doing the activity. It is not the capability. One of my best friends, and I talk about this all the time, there's commitment and then there's capability. And if people do not have the commitment part, they're not going to see success. And so I think that to me is one of the big things that you're asking for, which is that I'm at a place with my business where I don't just take on all clients. I think that that's something that I hope for all of your coaching that are out there, because it puts you in a place where you only work with people where there's win-win partnerships and people that really appreciate the work that you can do. And I don't think AI is solving for this, but people need the emotional support that coaches can provide and the kick in the ass, use my language, when people need to be pushed further than what they are doing. And no software system, even if you give them the playbook, as you and I were talking about earlier, it's like, okay, if we know that being vulnerable and sharing our own story is a part of the process to develop authenticity, and people are not willing to do that, there's not a lot that you can do as a coach if they're not willing to walk through that door. But really qualifying people based on their motivations and their capacity for change and their willingness to do things that you may recommend that are different.
That's a great reminder. I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time being open with this today. It was great having you on, Derek.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing where this goes.
That's it for this episode of Career Coaching Secrets. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this episode to catch future episodes. This podcast was brought to you by Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, or even $100,000 weeks, all without burning out and making sure that you're making the impact and having the life that you want. To learn more about our community and how we can help you, visit joinpurplecircle.com.